That would help, wouldn't it? Yeah, no sound. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, let's try again with the technology. Thanks, Charlie, for letting us know. Only just a minute or two in, rather than an hour and a half down. Let's start again. Good evening and welcome to the Lowestoft History Sessions with Ivan Bunn. For anybody who knows either Ivan or myself, you'll know that I'm not Ivan. My name's Stephen and I'm here from the Rogues Shanty Chorus, and we're an authentic fishing choir based in Lowestoft, which is in Waveney in East Anglia in the UK. And we've been broadcasting our own live stream since lockdown started, which is early to mid-March, and more recently we've actually managed to get Ivan online and talking to you, which has been extremely popular. So we're now on number 9 of these fantastic live stream broadcasts, and hopefully there'll be many more to continue, and we're getting more and more people join in. So if you'd like to, please do click share, and that means that more people can enjoy it. And look, since I've been talking about Ivan, I think I'm going to bring him on and say good evening, Ivan. How are you?
Good evening, Stephen. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm pretty good, thanks, all things considered. Hope we've had a good week.
Yeah, it's been all right, thank you. How about you?
They tend to come and go these weeks, don't they? And as you were saying a little bit earlier, half the time I'm not certain what day of the week it is anymore. These weekly sessions are kind of bookmarks where I can actually plot out the weeks ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, me too. Yeah. I'm going to go to a couple of comments already, Ivan. Susan Corkmaz says good evening, Ivan, and Sude says hello to all of us. Well, yeah, in fact, all of us. Jerry Paul says hi, Ivan. Jerry Paul also says there we go. I think that was based on me not having clicked unmute towards the beginning, but they can hear us now. We know that, so that's good. Schoolboy error.
Even Susan, even Jerry, I hope you're well, and everyone else, of course. I have the I don't know, the luck or the bad luck not to be able to see who even the messages that come up, not to read them anyway. So I'm totally dependent on Stephen to keep in the loop as to who might be sending messages in.
Well, look, we've had another one there, Ivan, from Linda Boyce. Lovely to tune in again.
Hi, Linda.
So, Ivan, I think so. Paul's actually done the last couple of these, so I've missed out. Although I have been listening in the background. And this evening, you're going to actually be talking about Gunten. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Just a little bit of backstory as to this presentation, which I've tweaked in actual fact a little bit. I've added a little bit more to it, hopefully to make it a little bit more interesting. By this time last year, or was it the year before now? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I was invited by the Gunton, at the AGM of the Gunton Residents Association to give a 45-minute talk about the history of Gunton. Now, for those who are not familiar with this area, Gunton is a very small parish immediately to the north of Lowestoft. Much history to it when you look at on the surface. And the talk I was asked to give, I thought, well, I know very little about Gunton, so I spent 3 or 4 months doing some research and decided rather than do an overall history of the whole parish and manor, which would probably take me years to put something together, what I decided to do, and this is the end product, I did a 45-minute presentation called Aspects of Gunton History. So I picked out certain elements that they're linked in some ways, of the history of the parish and manor, and just sort of really dipped a toe in the water, if you like, to see where things lead. Since I gave that talk best part of a year ago, and I've been following up 1 or 2 more leads, and I've been able to add a little bit more to it to make it a little bit more in depth.
Yeah.
So really, I suppose what you're getting is a revised aspects of Gunton history, which I hope you'll find interesting, especially if you're familiar with the area. There's some really nice woods and walks there as well. So we've now, as I'm sure you know from the last couple of times, we've now got the presentation on screen direct, which makes it much easier, I hope, for you to see. Unfortunately, me with my little tablet stuck in front of me here, I can't see the screen very well. So if I keep glancing off to my left, that's because I've actually got the presentation running more or less in sync on my laptop, where I can see the detail and then take it from there. So I hope you enjoy the talk. I'll try and keep it within an hour or so. Fortunately, some of the slides change automatically, so I have to stop talking because they change, and so I have to go on to the next subject. And Stephen, in between, when I can't control the presentation that you're seeing, Stephen, every so often I'll ask him to say next slide, and he'll click it, hopefully, and the next slide will come up. It's worked well so far, and I'm looking forward to doing it. I do enjoy giving these talks, although I've said for 9 weeks in a row now, this is the 9th time, I still find it slightly surreal not actually being able to see my audience after 40 years of public speaking. It's a little bit odd just looking at myself and Stephen. Not that there's anything odd about Stephen, but
well, there probably is, Ivan.
Well, it's two of a kind then. Yeah, and it's the only chance now that I get now I'm not at work and going out anywhere, gathering about. It's the only time every week that I get actually to put my tie on. So
I should at least button my shirt up, Ivan, shouldn't I? Let's do that. There you go.
Yeah. So when we can go.
I think so. I'm going to say bye, Ivan. I'll still be listening and in the background. So if you need anything, just holler. But it's all over to you now. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, hello everybody. Here I am on full screen here, staring out at myself. I think I've basically done the intro. We're 10 minutes into this session, so we'll get on, I think, with the presentation. If I can ask Stephen to get the slideshow running for me, please. Hopefully I should just share off your screens and you'll see the first slide come up. There is the first slide. Okay. You just need to give one more click, I think, Stephen. Here we go. The title page, Aspects of Gunton's History. That's going to be my theme tonight. I was explaining to you. What I intend to do to start with, to put my specs on, I can actually see the screen better. Okay, I want to look initially at origins of Gunton. Now, this is a map of Louvingland, the island of Louvingland. I'm sure you're familiar with it. We got the River Waveney on your left to the west, the North Sea to the east, Braden Water at the top, Great Yarmouth at the very top, and Lowestoft at the very bottom. And this is a map that's put together. I drew the maps. My very good friend and fellow historian, David Butcher, I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with his excellent work. He got the details from the Domesday Book, and between us we put this map together. I don't want to dwell on the map too much, except to say if you look at Lowestoft down the bottom left with Lake Louving, if you look above that, you'll see there's not a Gunton. There's no parish of Gunton listed in the Domesday Book. So we assume that at that time it wasn't a separate parish or a separate manor there. Lowestoft, Corton was bigger, and it looks as if part of Corton was taken to create Gunton. So if you could just click and change the maps for me, please. Stephen? Right. Now here is the map. This is taken about in the 12th century, this map, and you can see David Butchertree's excellent work from local 100 records has managed to piece together how the island of Lothing Land half hundred as it was called, has changed. Now there is an hours-long talk on this map. I'm not doing that. I just highlighted in green above Lowestoft the approximate position of Gunton. So by the 12th century, the 1100s, Gunton has been created as a parish and an independent manor. And the name itself, as you can see from the screen, Gunten, comes again, it's this mix that we tend to get in this part of the world of Old English and Danish words. So it's a Danish personal name, Gunnes, and Tun, which is the Old English meaning the homestead, a village, or an enclosure. And the very, very first reference to it is in the year, written reference to it is Gunton or Gunten in the year 1198. And there's the first record of a manor in that year is in 1190, but by all accounts it was probably established just prior to this date, possibly during the reign of Henry II, 1154 to 1189. So we know that certainly by the middle of the 12th century, Gunton does exist as a named parish and a manor. And in many ways, Gunton is unique because, with the exception of a couple of little bits of land, the whole of the parish, the ecclesiastical parish, is identical. The boundaries are identical to the boundaries of the manor of Gunton. So the secular manor of Gunton and the ecclesiastical parish of Gunton share exactly the same boundaries, which again is an indication that the manor and parish were created almost certainly at the same time. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please, Stephen. Here's an aerial view of modern Gunton taken from Google Maps. And if you're familiar with the area, it shouldn't need a lot of explanation. All down the eastern side, the right-hand side as you look at the map is the North Sea and the beach. Across the top, very straight line of a road, that's Corton Long Lane. Down the western left-hand side of the map, snaking again to the bottom centre, is the A47, the road to Great Yarmouth, and south back into Lowestoft. And then, of course, you've got Corton Road that runs up the almost vertically from the a third of the way in at the bottom. So that's the area that we're looking at. And of course, Pleasurewood Hills Family Theme Park is marked on this map, just to give a reference point. That the theme park, in actual fact, is just outside the boundary of Gunton. It's actually in Corton, in the parish of Corton. Now, my main document when it comes to maps, I've worked a lot on the tithe map for Gunton, 1844. So what I want to do now is to wind back the clock to the year 1844 and bleed through this modern aerial photograph, the map of Gunton in 1844, so you can see, hopefully, just how much has changed there. So we can just click the screen once. So this is the Gunton from the, it's a redrawn, it's from the original Gunton tithe map that's in the Lowestoft Record Office. Fortunately, it's one of the documents that will remain at Lowestoft after a lot of the stuff is moved. And you could read it if you wanted. I've made this, I hope, very accurate copy of it. And so the different aspects I'm going to look at, starting from the top left, is the Gunton Hall, the present Gunton Hall, a little bit about that. St. Peter's Church, Gunton. The old hall, that's long since gone, which was adjacent to the church. We have a look at that during this talk. And the next aspect is going to be a little bit about the deans and the scores of Gunton. More about the scores later. And this cottage, or this house, Warren House, that's out at the foot of the cliff in Gunton, again, that will feature in my story. Most of these things are linked. And last but no means least, Hall Farm. The farmhouse is still there. So these are the aspects. I hope it's very clear from that map just where we are. If you look at the top where the scale is and the word Corton, I haven't drawn it in completely, but that's Corton Long Lane. And the parish boundary is just to the south of that. And if you follow the red line all the way around, it's not very clear, starting from Lowestoft and going all the way around, that's not only the boundary of the parish, with the parish church of St. Peter, but also the boundary of the manor. If you look at the bottom left of the map, you'll see there's two fields, and two complete fields, and a part of a field coloured pink. Those are the only two pieces of land that don't, although they're in Gunton, they don't actually belong to the manor of Gunton. They actually belong to Lowestoft. But all the rest of the lands that you see on that map are the lands of the manor of Gunton and also the parish of Gunton. The parish contains, comes from the 1844 White's Directory of Suffolk. The parish contains 867 acres and 17 perches of land, which is basically about 867.25 acres of land. All of that, well, apart from 9.5 acres, which are glebe, which belong to the church. All of those lands, with the exception of those two pink areas, belong to the manor of Gunton. So what I intend to do is step by step go through some of these different aspects and see if I can bring some of the stories and historical background to light. Excuse me while I have a little sip of water. So we're not looking at a large area. So if we can just change screens again, please, Stephen. So here's the map of Gunton, stripped of just about all the detail. What I just want to have a look at in 1844, if you're familiar with the how urban Gunton is today, let's just have a look what constituted the different lands. So all of the green areas on this map that you can see now are woods and plantations. The dark green areas are actually probably quite ancient woodland. The paler green areas are lands that have been plantations, which speak for themselves. They've been planted by the lord of the manor. These pale green areas are areas of pasture. That includes all of the deans. And then the brown area, these are all arable lands. And all of those arable lands in 1844 were farmed by, not by the lords of the manor, but he let them to a farmer who lived at Hall Farm, which is just towards the bottom of the map. Hopefully you can see that quite clearly. The white areas are just domestic areas that are not described on the tide map. So you can see the whole of Gunton, all 967 acres of it, is basically very rural and very, very sparsely populated. So that's Gunton in 1844. I'll keep coming back to the map. If we can move on to the next screen, please, Stephen. So our first port of call is St. Peter's Church at Gunton. Now, there was no church mentioned in the Domesday Book. There's no parish in the Domesday Book. And it's almost certain that the church was built around about the time the parish was created and the manor of Gunton was set up. And despite the fact there's a round tower there, which is usually associated with Saxon churches, the architecture, and as you can see, if you're familiar with Norman architecture, the picture of the door that I put up there, that's actually the north door of the church, which is an incredibly well-preserved, pure Norman doorway. The church is Norman, which ties in nicely with the dates, the mid-12th century, when the parish was probably formed. So here's St. Peter's Church, an older picture of St. Peter's Church. Quite an ancient edifice. Unlike most Norman churches, it's got a round tower, as I just said, rather than the square or rectangular tower that you see on the normal Norman church. That's why there's, it must have been quite, the parish and manor must have been quite poor. So rather than import work freestone for the corners of the of a square tile that you need to support it, it's easier and cheaper to actually build a round tower. And that's probably why this Norman church doesn't have a square tower, but a round tower. If you look at the picture that's on the screen now, probably from the late 1870s, early 1880s, you can see, excuse me, some buildings in the background. That's the old hall, the old manor house, if you like, of Gunton. This is the main residence at this time and for generations before that, where the lord of the manor lived most of the time. Anyway, again, we'll come on to some of the lords of the manor in a little while. So if we change screens again, please. Okay, so this is Gunton Old Hall. This is a photograph. The one on the screen at the moment, that's the oldest part of the hall. We're told by a local guidebook from the 19th century. I put the little extract there. The old hall, which adjoins the churchyard. In fact, the hall had a private gate leading directly into the churchyard and the church. The old hall, which adjoins the churchyard, is probably in part a very ancient mansion, though it was much altered and improved in 1746 by the owner of the manor, the lord of the manor, with the wonderful name of Huling Lewson. There's a picture of Mr. Lewson at the top right of the screen, and the bottom picture shows the hall after Huling Lewson extended it. He seems to have got the property in the late 1730s or early 1740s. I haven't been able to establish an exact date. He will feature in one or two other aspects of this talk as I go through it. I've also made a discovery which kind of throws some doubt onto the statement that the old hall is a very ancient mansion. Again, I'll pick that aspect up in a little bit later on. So this is Gunton Old Hall. It was certainly demolished and gone by the late 1950s, early 1960s. Before all the woods grew up round there and the place was developed, I can distinctly remember going there before any of the houses and bungalows were built in the area, and you could still see the foundations and the footprint of the old hall, but that's long since disappeared. So Gunton Old Hall, a fascinating building, but it's very, very difficult to find anything out about it whatsoever. Apart from this discovery I think I've made from some earlier documents, which I'll come on to in a moment. So if we push on to the next slide, please. Now, this is a detail taken from the tithe map again. I've traced this from the original tithe map. You can see Gunton Church Lane leading through the fields up to the church. There's the old hall. There's the location of the church. There's a little tiny cottage that butted up against the northwest corner of the church. That circle, I think, indicates a well, and I'll show you why in a moment. And there is the barn and stables. Anybody who's familiar with this area, most of this area today is covered by Gunton Woods. And so the entry to the footpath, as you can see, is now still going through the woods, although back in the day in 1844, it's simply a pasture. The interesting feature, that's why I put this on here, is this long pond that's marked very distinctly on the tithe map, and it's named as the fish pond. Now, back in medieval times and later, all manor houses would have their fish ponds in which they kept and bred fish for the table. So there is the fish pond clearly marked. I sort of made it so it goes blue so we can see exactly what I'm talking about. Going back to the well in the to the north west of the little cottage, which is long since gone, there is in fact still a well in almost exactly the same location. This is a photograph that I took, I think it was earlier this year in actual fact, or end of last year. So this is taking, looking southeast towards the church. The church is behind the three big trees there, and that's the well that's now been made very safe and covered. But that's the well, and the well would almost certainly have been used possibly by the hall, but almost certainly by the people that lived in that tiny little cottage. So there are little aspects of the original site that can be seen, and also if you could go back in time from in the photograph and look over that well and look down to the southeast where those three trees and the bushes in front of them are, that's where you would have seen the wall to the cottage and the little cottage behind. When I explored the area some months back, it was in the winter months, so there wasn't a lot of foliage about. When you go through all the undergrowth there, you can still trip over what appears to be the remains of walls and fences, the remains of the cottage. If we come to the present day, if we could just change screens again, please, Stephen. This is from the Ordnance Survey map of 1882-83, and again, it's basically the same area of my redrawn tithe map, but you can see 40 years later what would become Gunton, present-day Gunton Woods. Back in 1844, just an open pasture. is now quite well studded with pretty mature looking trees. There's St. Peter's Church, there's Gunton Old Hall, the cottage is still there, the stables are still there, and fish pond, it's changed shape slightly, is still there. And if we superimpose that over, and I hope this is clear, you can see, what I've done is I superimposed that 1882-83 Ordnance Survey map over a modern aerial view of that area of Gunton. Hopefully you can see the detail, the field boundaries of the original map and the present features, and you can see just off centre, you can see it's number 43 on there. That in actual fact is the location of the fish pond, and the fish pond, or the remains of the fish pond, are still there. The original manor fish pond is still there. And if we just change slides once more, please, Stephen. There is the remains of the fish pond on Gainsborough Drive, right, almost dead opposite the entry to the primary school there. It's the green area marks the extent, the whole extent of the original pond. There's only sort of the northern 2/3 of it in existence, but this is the pond, the fish pond, probably been there since medieval times. And also that area, there are very, very many copious springs, and so this pond is almost certainly spring fed, and this is where the lord of the manor would have kept and bred his fish for the table in years gone by. And as you see, the old hall is, if you could climb into the map and turn right and walk through the buildings, 160 yards due east would bring you to the old hall. So that's the fish pond, the last, really the only relic of the original old hall still to be seen. So we move on quickly to the next slide. This is a drawing, a nice little engraving showing Gunton in 1680. The original is in the British Library, and Lowestoft, the north end of Lowestoft is on your extreme left, Corton is on your extreme right. In the background, centre background, you can see the artist has drawn the little round tower of Gunton Church with the hall next door to it, and across the fields, not in perspective, you can see St Margaret's Church in Lowestoft set way back, obviously just as it is today. But there, excuse me, we have these unique features on this stretch of coast for the people who are not perhaps particularly familiar with Lowestoft. Scores are footways down the cliff that take you from the road at the top of the cliff down to the road at the bottom of the cliff. They are mostly in Lowestoft, although they're not unique to Lowestoft. There are other scores along the coast here in Corton, Pakefield, and there's even a couple, I think, in Beccles going down the embankment there. And the scores on this map have named. I put the names on it there in red. So again, anybody that's familiar with Gunton and Lowestoft will see starting from left to right, Gunton score. That's the present day ravine, taking you down onto Wafflewood Road, and the big house immediately to the left, as we look at the screen of that, that's probably the house that sits where Sparrow's Nest Park is today. So that's Gunton score, so named because it at one time I think was probably formed the parish boundary. Then the next score along, Sandhill score, and the next score along is Green score. I'm going to come back to Green score in a moment because that's quite an interesting score. I have to say, apart from Gunton score, the ravine, none of these scores marked here in 1580 exist anymore. Then we've got Lopham score. Quite why Lopham, I don't know, but on a fairly old map, an enclosure at the top, a large field at the top of the cliff here, immediately where Lopham score is simply called Lopham's. So it's possibly a small holding, a piece of land that perhaps once belonged to the Lopham family, and this is their way of getting from there down, and it's named after them. Then you've got Girdle score, no idea why it's called Girdle score, and the last score, which is basically the boundary between, to the north between Gunton and Corton, is called Jesuin or Hallie-Wafer score. Don't ask me why. Myself and my colleague David Butcher have agonized over this for Oz and Oz. And we're not really certain where that name comes from. It's obviously got some sort of religious Christian overtones. And there is an argument whether the word is Hallie-Wafer or Hallie-Water, which could be a construction, a corruption of holy water. But looking at the original map through a strong magnifying glass, it's almost certain that that's a F there and not a T. I can't find an explanation for that whatsoever. So that's basically Gunton. There you can see the Gunton Deans at the bottom of the cliff, the scores going up the cliff, and then the heath at the top of the cliff. There's one wood as shown and a few more trees round the church and that small building, which stands exactly where the old hall stood today. We move on to the next map, please, the next screen. Right. This is not one of the scores. This is Gunton, but this is one of the scores. These are what the scores would have looked like back in the day. Those ones marked on that map would have looked like that. Score is a corruption of probably an old Danish word, skur, which means to scour or to cut a cleft. And these scours down the cliff caused by the natural runoff of water when it rains hard. And this is one I photographed at Gunton. They do tend to kind of evolve depending on how much or how little rain that we've had. But back in the day, in the 16th century and before that, these scores would be used as natural footpaths down the cliff, just as they are today. And the scores at Lowestoft at one point, before the town grew up there in the 13th century, would have been sandy tracks down the cliff that have kind of become fossilized. Again, I don't want to go into the history of scores because that's another talk in its own. But so this just gives you some idea, I hope, of what, if you'd have gone there in 1580, you would have seen on the cliff. So if we pass on to the next slide, it's just going to take us back, I hope, to this map again. Now, here is the enigma. I've gone back to here. You remember the 1, 2, 3rd score from the left as you look at the map is called green score. And at the bottom of the score, right at the very bottom of the score, is a very large house. And if you look at that house, I've outlined it in the box, so there's no mistaking where it is. If you look at that house, it's big. It's one of the biggest houses drawn on this whole part of a much bigger panoramic view along the cliff from Kirkley all the way to Galston. This is just the section for Gunton, and it's on this section it's by far the biggest. And it got me, I thought about it and I thought, well, perhaps it's just a perspective thing. It's the nearest to the viewpoint of the person who drew this. So he's made it the biggest house because of that. Because if you look at the manor house, the old hall by the church in the centre top, it's a much smaller, inconspicuous building. This is a much bigger building with a fair number of chimneys, probably 2.5 stories high. Some other houses built against it, and it stands at the foot of the cliff by Green Score, so it's got access to the cliff and to the heath above and the road. Until, as I'm sure a lot of you know, until January this year, I worked at the Lowestoft record office. I've since retired, but one of my jobs while I was there for about 8 or 9 years was to help catalogue many of the collections in the strong room that hadn't been fully catalogued. One of the collections was a very large collection of documents that had belonged to the Fowler family of Gunton. The Fowler family will meet in a little while. I was going through there. Some of the documents went back to the 17th century. They're mostly deeds to the manor. Fascinating documents to catalogue and explore and study. And much to my surprise, an early description when the manor was sold. If we could just click the button for me, please, Stephen. That should bring some words up, I hope. This is the conundrum, the enigma. One of the descriptions of the manor of Gunton says, all that the manor of Gunton, okay, fair enough, and one messuage, that's an old name for a piece of land and the buildings on it, or tenement called Green Score House. So that must be Green Score House. And then it adds, otherwise, or known as, Gunton Hall. And this is in 1681. And for many years, up until the late 1700s, it's still referring to Green Score House, otherwise Gunton Hall. That's the enigma, because at the top there, we've got Gunton Old Hall, which is supposed to be a very ancient building. And yet here, certainly in 1580 and after that, there is a large house called Green Score House, standing at the foot of Green Score, also known as or otherwise called Gunton Hall in Gunton. And this is from 1681. So it makes me wonder if the original manor house, in actual fact, wasn't by the church at all, but down at the foot of the cliff on Gunton Deans. I'm going to come on to the Deans very shortly. I can't give you the answer to that. Hopefully one day I can get back to the record office when everything gets back to what we used to call normal, and have another search to see if I can find an explanation for that. We'll come back to Green Score House, otherwise Gunton Hall, in a short while. So while we're at the foot of the cliff at Gunton, let's, if we change slides, please, Stephen, have a look at the Deans. So here's a V. It's not the Lowestoft, the Deans at Lowestoft, according to this postcard. It's actually Gunton Deans, seen from the cliff at Lowestoft, just to the north of the ravine score, the Gunton score. And we're looking, this must be about 1880. And the deeds of the manor tell us that Gunton Deans contained 1,000 acres. There was more land on the Deans below the cliff at Gunton than there was in the whole parish and manor of Gunton above the cliff, 1,000 acres. And you can see here just the extent. Now we're looking northeast. You can see the extent of these deans. The red line is my approximation of where the current beaches at Gunton gone through to Corton. So you can see how much is lost. There's another story. There's the same amount again, if not more, that's there today that's being lost. And along the protection from the sea were the Marham Hills and sand dunes that you can see along the horizon there. So that's the Gunton deans as were. Again, there's a story, as another presentation that I do, looking at how the deans were lost, why they were lost, and how eventually it was necessary to build a sea wall. But we'll come back that another time. So if we could just change slides again, please, Stephen. Now, Gunton deans in Victorian times were in actual fact used in the summer by the local artillery and militia regiments and the infantry militia regiments. They would march to Gunton every year, every summer, and there they would parade. And here's a view, a lovely little print and an early photograph showing an encampment of the militia on the deans at Gunton. And they became quite Sundays, so we're told. Everybody would put up their finery and go up onto the cliff top of Gunton and watch the soldiers parading down on the deans at Gunton. That's how much space there was there. And there was also, because sometimes the militia regiments that came were artillery and sometimes they were infantry, there was below the cliff at Gunton, long since gone now because the coastal erosion has taken away, there was an artillery range where they could fire their artillery pieces, and there was also a rifle range there as well. The artillery range was in Gunton. The rifle range was just a little bit further south on the Lowestoft deans. But so the deans weren't just there for people to enjoy, they were actually being used by the military. The little house that you can see just off the centre in the middle, that's roughly where Green Score House stood. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. That's known as Warren House. So if you can go to the next slide. So Warren House, again, here is a 1927 Ordnance Survey map detail to give you some idea of where it is, especially if you're not particularly familiar with the area. Going up the left-hand side of this map is Corton Road, and there, just still there today, is Links Road that take you down to the sea wall, just as it does on this map. And the Warren House was not that many yards to the north of Links Road. Again, if there's anybody familiar with this area, everything is gone. All the little paddocks and orchards have gone. The house has long since gone. But if you look closely, just to the left of Warren House, you can see the word spring. There's a spring of water coming out of the cliff, and that spring of water is still there today. In fact, I was only there last Friday, and the flow of water is as copious as ever it was. And it's somewhere in this region, round by the spring, is where Green Score would have been. And it's probably called Green Score because the amount of wet and damp there would have meant that whole area was very, very verdant and green. And that's possibly where the name Green Score came from. So if we move slide, go on to the next slide now, please. So here's a view of Warren House, taken from roughly where Links Road is today. And you can see here quite clearly, if you look at the house and then you move your eyes to the left, you can see the declivity in the cliff there, which is Green Score. That's where Green Score runs down to the little cottage, Warren House. This is, as I said, this is Warren House. Here's a better view of Warren House. It was, in fact, although it's one building, it was divided into 3 very small cottages. And here you can see the occupants of one of the cottages having their photograph taken. And again, the cliff to the left. And there is quite an interesting connection here. Again, I go slightly at a tangent. We're told, again, from the deeds from the 19th century, they describe this Warren cottage as all that watermill and cottage with the buildings and lands which premises are situated in Gunton, formerly in the occupation of Hewlin-Lewson, there's our man again, Phillip Walker and Messrs. Brown and Company. Hewlin-Lewson, Phillip Walker and Messrs. Brown and Company were actually, in fact, the men who set up the famous Lowestoft porcelain factory in Lowestoft in 1756. And the clay for the porcelain came from Gunton. The clay has to be washed and prepared through running water. Once it's dug out, it had to be purified, and it's probably an accepted fact now that the clay for the Lowestoft porcelain was extracted at Gunton, but not by digging holes in the ground and digging the clay out, but by actually removing it from the cliff face, just digging the clay out. It has to be washed with running water and all the impurities cleaned out of it before it's shipped to the porcelain factory in Lowestoft. And the water mill would be used to power the equipment that would cleanse the clay. Again, making porcelain and preparing the clay is not part of my expertise, but it's almost an accepted fact now that this is where the clay for the porcelain at Lowestoft was prepared. Excuse me one moment while I'm having a little sip of water. This photograph, taken probably in the 1870s, long after the China factory closed. The China factory opened in 1756 and had gone by the year 1802. So this is the best part of 80 years after the factory has closed, and the water mill and all the equipment is gone. And now we've just got this wonderful fountain squirting out of the cliffs. And if you go there today, you can see that fountain again. We move on to the next slide. Now, I apologize for the quality of this map. This is a map of 18, I forget the date now. It's early 1900s anyway. This shows you Bellevue Park. And now this is 1882. I've just seen it's Cliff Cottage marked on there. Cliff Cottage is Sparrow's Nest. Bellevue Park, the ravine to the north of that. And there is a score in Lowestoft, because we're in Lowestoft now, called Cart Score. And I often wondered about Cart Score because it doesn't, in actual fact, go straight down the cliff whatsoever, but it runs at quite an angle down the cliff. Then studying this map not so long ago, it suddenly occurred to me that there is an actual fact. If you look at the map, you'll see at the foot of the cliff a double dotted line, which is in actual fact a trackway or a cart track, and that takes you straight to where the Warren cottages were. I haven't put they're further off the top of the map, and this is almost certainly the way that they would have carted the clay from the cliff by the Warren house all the way to Lowestoft, rather than try and drag a cart up the much steeper cliff. They had this path that went diagonally up the cliff, which would be much less steep and also much wider than some of the scores. And it's still the way the traffic comes up from below the cliff even today. If you could just click a key for me, please, Stephen. If you look there, hopefully if this is working on your map, it is, yeah. This is the track that I'm talking about. This is a cartway, and hence probably the origins of the name of Cart Score. This is where they would cart the clay and other wagons. I'm sure the militia, when they went down onto Gunton Deans, would have marched down this road and this track to get out onto the Deans further to the north, rather than scramble unceremoniously down the cliff. So I'm pretty certain that that's where the name Cart Score comes from. Right, we must push on. I see. Oh, sorry, right at the bottom, there's a photograph taken probably in the 1880s, looking directly north from halfway up the cliff by the ravine, and there you can see quite clearly, snaking away on the left-hand side by the hedge and trees, you can actually see that cart track, that cartway there. And when the Dean's Oval cricket ground, tennis courts, etc., were built in the 1920s, they actually left about a 15-foot wide gap between the western wall and the foot of the cliff, and because that's where the trackway was that presumably people were still using. And part of the trackway is still there today. I walked it on Friday. So anyway, if we move on to the next slide, please. I'm conscious of the fact that this is a press cutting from the London Gazette, 20th of October 1761, which tells us that Hewlin Lewson was a bit of a lad by all accounts. Of Gunton was declared to be bankrupt. And by 1763, there is another announcement in the London Gazette. We're looking here, what, 18 months or so later, that he's now settling his debts. And how did he settle his debts? Well, it's quite easy. From the Ipswich Journal, 2nd of October 1762, has an advertisement for the sale of the manor with the advowson. The advowson is the right of the lord of the manor to appoint the rector, and also a very good farmhouse with convenient outhouses, brick kilns, and a soup office. This is Hall Farm. We'll come more to that. There we are. All in exceedingly good repair, including a warren for rabbits. That's Warren Cottage, consisting of 856 acres of land, now let to Mr. Phillip Walker. Mr. Phillip Walker was one of the founder members and owners of the Lowestoft porcelain factory. He was paying £250 a year on a lease, which expired the following year. The whole of the above premises are freehold. We aren't interested in that, and capable of great improvement, there being a great quantity of clay on the premises. So once again, we've got reference to clay, which is almost the same clay that was being used at the porcelain factory. So we now need to see the poor Hewlin Lewson has gone bust. He's been declared bankrupt. He's had to pay off all his debts or go into prison, as they did with bankrupts back in the day. And so he's been forced to sell the manor of Gunton and everything that goes with it. So if we move on to the next slide, please. This, oh, sorry, sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. This is Kingsmead. This is the big house set back from the Yarmouth Road there today. And that is in actual fact the farmhouse of Hall Farm, a wonderful 18th century building. And this is the farmhouse where Phillip Walker lived. And again, the press cutting from the Ipswich Journal, 6th of October 1764, tells us that Phillip Walker's lease has run out and he's vacating the farm, probably to come to live in Lowestoft as he did to help run the porcelain factory. And it's not, this is not the manor that's being leased. The lord of the manor, the owner of the farm, whoever bought it, and we'll come to that in a moment, he's leasing the farm. He doesn't want to be a farmer, the lord of the manor doesn't. He just wants the glory that goes with being the lord of the manor. And so he's going to lease the farm again. And it says, to let at Gunton, a farm consisting of many hundred acres of very improvable land with good measure, clay upon the premises. Also, there's 2 kilns there and other proper conveniences for making and burning red and white bricks, and pan tiles and flagstones and pan tiles with proper clay for the making of the same upon the premises. So Phillip Walker is in actual fact at the farm at Gunton, as well as being involved in the porcelain manufactory at Lowestoft. He is actually producing brick and pennants and tiles and pan tiles in both red and white at the farmhouse in Gunton. And again, that's using almost certainly the same clay, which much more refined would have been used to produce the Lowestoft porcelain. So anyway, as I said, the farm was sold after, the manor was sold after the Hula Lucent went bust. And who bought it? So if we change slides again now, please. This is the man that bought it. One of England's 18th century sea heroes, Admiral Sir Charles Saunders. He was a Knight of the Bath, Lieutenant General of Marines, First Lord of the Admiralty, and the Privy Councillor. And he retired under different, he's got an interesting backstory as well, but we won't go into the details of that. But by the 1862-63, he had resigned from the Navy after becoming quite a hero. In 1759, he was the commander of the large fleet of 200 ships that accompanied General Wolfe to Canada, to Quebec, and he was in charge of the naval aspects of that. After General Wolfe was killed at the Battle of the Heights of Abraham in September of 1759, Sir Charles Saunders took over and with another colonel accepted the surrender of the French after the battle at the Heights of Abraham, one of the so-called glorious victories. And it was on his flagship that he brought the body of General Wolfe back to England to be buried in Westminster Abbey. So that's the guy who's purchased the manor of Gunton, paid £1,430, 19 shillings and sixpence for it. And he moved in the 1860s, and he did quite a lot of work. He was a bit of an agriculturalist. He actually died the 7th of December 1775 in his London home, not here. And this is his obituary from the Hampshire Chronicle, 18th of December 1775. he sounds as if he was not only very wealthy, but a true sailor, because the report in the paper reads, ignore that for a minute, reads, Sir Charles Saunders died worth £130,000. That was what his fortune was. He had bequeathed to Admiral Keppel £5,000 and £12,000 per year for life to Admiral Sir Hugh Palliser, £5,000 to Timothy Brett Esquire, £5,000 to his nephew, and this is the bit I like. He also bequeathed £200 per year to a young lady that lived with him, a real sailor if there was one. So all of this paints a picture of him. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, very close to the grave of General James Wolfe, and there's the plaque there from Westminster Abbey, which tells us that he was commanding the British forces in Quebec in 1759. This is his will, an extremely long will. This is a copy from the National Archives. There's the reference number of it. And it's I think it ran to about 20 pages in length, his will did. Very complex will. So what happened after his death to the Gunton estate? That's a rhetorical question. I'm going to tell you. To the manor of Gunton, and what happened to it? Well, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I'll show you how the descent of the property. After his death, Sir Charles Saunders left the property to his only living child, Anne Saunders. Anne Saunders married a certain Peter Kinsey, and they had 2 children. Anne Kinsey, born in 1780. Charles, her brother, died young, so she was dead by the time the father died. Anne Kinsey married Dr. Richard Huck Saunders, who was quite a wealthy and important surgeon in London. And they had 2 children, and Dr. Richard, Jane Huck Saunders, and Anne Huck Saunders. Both of them married well. Jane Huck Saunders, who was a bit of a lively gal, judging by her biographies, she married the John Fane, the 10th Earl of Westmoreland. Anne Huck Saunders, who was a far more sedate young lady, she married Robert Dundas, 2nd Viscount Melville. And just as I've gone off at a tangent, his statue sits in Edinburgh on Melville Street, and Robert Dundas, and this is one of the statues that they're thinking of pulling down because of his family's involvement in the slave trade. It's one of those ones that's actually been defaced very recently with the Black Lives Matter move. I mean, it's got nothing to do with Gunton whatsoever, but there's a link there, a current link with Robert Dundas, Anne Huck Saunders, and Gunton. So Anne Kinsey and Dr. Huck Kinsey, they owned the manor of Gunton until their death, and they left the manor and estate at Gunton Hall in trust for their 2 daughters, Anne and Jane. So Anne and Jane, after the death of Anne Kinsey in 1780, they actually become the owners of the Gunton Hall, but they don't live there. They're far too well up the social scale to come and scuttle into a little place like Gunton in the middle of nowhere, and the back of beyond they would have seen. And so they would have put a tenant in to the hall and the Hall farm. In 1802, they obviously, for some reason, decided to get rid of a lot of the lands in this part of the world. And the 2 sisters put the property on the market. And here's an advert from the Norfolk Chronicle telling us that the manor, they're going to sell the manor of Gunton with the mansion house called Gunton Hall. Again, they named the tenant a man by the name of Gerard Montague, Esquire, who's living at the old hall. We're still talking about the old hall, but I have not been able to find out anything about him at all. So I don't know. I don't know who this fella is, but he's somebody up the tree because he's an Esquire. Can you flick to the next slide for me, please? Sorry, I've jumped the gun here. This is let me just take mine back there and just explain what you're looking at there. Yeah, so this is the obituary for. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. My machine wasn't syncing with yours. I apologise. Yeah, so this is the obituary of Admiral Saunders. And a copy of his will and the plaque marking his grave in Westminster Abbey. So, sorry, Stephen, if we can pop on to the next slide now, please. And as I was explaining, although you weren't seeing the pictures, again, I apologise, this is the descent of the hall. So there's Admiral Charles Saunders. Anne Saunders, his daughter, his only daughter, marries Peter Kinsey. They have a daughter, Anne Kinsey, and a son, Charles, who predeceases them all. Anne Kinsey marries Dr. Richard Huck Saunders. And they have two daughters, Jane Huck Saunders, Anne Huck Saunders. Jane marries John Fane, the 10th Earl of Westmoreland, and Anne marries Robert Dundas, 2nd Viscount Melville. And when Anne Kinsey died in 1780, she left the property in trust to the two daughters, Anne and Jane. And as I said, Anne Huck Saunders married Robert Dundas, the controversial man who was involved in the slave trade, whose statue stands in Melville Street in Edinburgh, and is one of the statues that has been recently defaced and is threatened to be demolished. So Anne and Jane own the hall, and if we move on to the hall and estate at Gunton, we move on to the next slide, please. For some reason, probably because they didn't want the manor of Gunton miles from anywhere, the girls, the two sisters, never had anything. They never came here, I wouldn't think. They just inherited this little parish and manor. They, in actual fact, decide, or their trustees decide to put the property on the market on the 3rd of July 1802. Well, this is the advert from the Norfolk Chronicle in July 1802, and the property was sold. We're given the name, as I said, of the occupant, Gerard Montague, Esquire. Who he is or was, I have no idea. And the hall went on the market, and it was purchased by Thomas Fowler and his wife, Mary Soame Fowler of Hobland Hall, not far up the road from Gunton. They purchased the manor from the trustees of the two sisters on the 2nd of February 1803. The Fowlers then became the resident lords of the manor. And there, if we could change slides again, please, for me. Okay. Thomas Fowler was a Yarmouth man, born in 1758, baptized at Great Yarmouth. He's a Presbyterian and a sailmaker. As a single man, aged 35, he married Mary Soame Ives, a widow, aged 24, quite a wealthy widow who lived at Bradwell He married her on the 23rd of May 1793. Just bear that date in mind, and we'll come back to that in a minute. She was the widow of John Ives of Great Yarmouth, who she had married on the 6th of January 2 years earlier. Her name was Mary Soame Cook when she got married. Now, John Ives died in 1793, and his will was proved at the PCC, on the 4th of May that year. And the executors of his will were, would you believe, his widow and Thomas Fowler, who on the 23rd of May that same year, 19 days after the will was proved, he married Ives's widow. So there's some sort of going on here in the background, I think. And we know from the will that in actual fact at the time of John Ives' death, Thomas Fowler was actually living with the couple at Bradwell in their house there, and he dies there. There's a good plot here for something like Downton Abbey, I should think. Over the next few years, as you can see, a big family was born. John Ives Fowler, Mary Ann Fowler, Thomas Cook Fowler, Robert Cook Fowler, Frederick Cook Fowler, Charlotte Cook Fowler, Maria Fowler, Catherine Cook Fowler, Jane Cook Fowler, and Frederick Cook Fowler again, quite late on in 1822. I'm going to come back to him in a moment. If we could just click the button for me, please, Stephen. All of these children, I had such a job locating their baptisms because they weren't baptized Church of England whatsoever, but they were all baptized, and I found their details in the register of the Presbyterian Chapel in Great Yarmouth. And that's where I eventually tracked them down to. Thomas Fowler, obviously after buying the hall, moved into Gunton. He died there in 1831. His widow, Mary Soame Fowler, once the wife of John Ives, she died in 1847, aged 78. So we push on to the next slide, please. One of the first things that the Fowlers did when they, after they purchased the estate, obviously they didn't like the old hall. They decided to build themselves a brand new hall. The present day Gunton Hall stands on the site, and parts of the original old hall are incorporated in the present day Gunton Hall, the new hall. This was erected in 1809 and was completed by 1810, and it's described at the time as a good mansion surrounded by plantations of trees interspersed with shrubs and underwood. So they now move out of the old hall and move into their posh new hall way to the north, close to the parish boundary with Corton, where it still sits today. If we could change slides once more for me, please. Now, the Fowlers were very, very upmarket family. There's no early photographs of them at all. There's no identity of who these are, but this is a photograph probably taken from 70 years after the Fowlers purchased the hall. Generations of the Fowlers lived in the new hall. And this is a picture just to give you some idea of the type of people who the Fowlers were. As I said, I can't put names to any of them, but these are all Fowlers from Gunton Hall in the second half of the 19th century. Pushing on to the next slide, please. So we asked the question if oh, sorry, I just need to get my thing. Yeah. Okay, when the Huck sisters owned the hall, as I said, they never lived in the hall. They got a tenant for the hall and the farm and the estate. And this was quite a celebrity from Great Yarmouth, John Dawson Downes, a retired bookseller. He moved into the hall when after the death of Admiral Saunders and after the property devolved to the Huck sisters. He moved into the property, and there's an obituary for him. He was a gentleman, and he was a member of the Horticultural Society. He was very interested in gardening, and one of his most outstanding features was he was a discriminating naturalist and one of the most skilled modern amateur falconers. And he actually wrote a book about the subject of falconry, and he's the man that settles as tenant to the Huck sisters in the hall, and not until he died, probably until he died in 1829. Now, if you remember Frederick Cook Fowler, the baptism, if you just go back to the previous screen, in 1822, he's baptized again in 1822. He was already baptized in 1807 at the Presbyterian Chapel, but he obviously had decided, or his family decided, that he should become a Church of England clergyman, and he couldn't because he hadn't been baptized into the Church of England. So in 1822, in Gunton Church, he was rebaptized into the Church of England, and that way he could go to Jesus College, Cambridge, and eventually be ordained as a priest in the Church of England at Norwich on the 10th of June 1827. And his dad, Thomas, in actual fact, as Lord of the Manor, could appoint the clergyman to become the rector of St. Peter's, and he put his son into the he became the rector of Gunton. So Frederick Cook Fowler becomes the rector of St. Peter's, Gunton. And conveniently, just around about the time that he was ready to have his own living in a parish church, John Dawson Downes had died at the old hall, and the old hall becomes vacant. And so Frederick Cook Fowler moves into the hall. Mum and Dad are now living in the new hall, and he becomes, with his wife and family, the resident rector of Gunton and the inhabitant of the old hall. And if we go on again, we're getting close to the end now. Here's the 1841 census, just to give you a clue. The left-hand side of the 1841 census, this is Gunton Hall. This is the new hall. Living in there now is Thomas Fowler's eldest son, Robert Fowler, with his wife, Georgiana. And the whole of that left-hand page are the inhabitants of the new hall. And there's extended family there as well. But if you look, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 servants in the hall. So that's a lot of servants. Poor old Frederick, the younger son, who's now the rector of Gunton, is living in the old hall, as you can see outlined on the opposite page. He's living there, and he's got his aging mother Mary living there with him, and his wife and children are there as well. So they're all together in the old hall, just a small, the Reverend Frederick Fowler, while his elder brother Robert, with all his servants and his great entourage, are living in the new hall. To move on to the next slide, we've more or less come to the end now. As I said, these are aspects. So we look at the population of Gunton. It's not, can we move to the next slide, please? So there you can see from the census taken every year from 1801 to 1836. You can see very, very sparsely populated. Even in 1931, there was only 110 people living in the whole of the parish. The 1851 census, as you'll see in a moment, here's Warren House, 3 cottages in Warren House. And very shortly in 1851, we'll have a look at the census there. Here it comes. So these are the 3 cottages in Warren House. 1, 2, 3 cottages there. And they're absolutely packed with 3 families. And in actual fact, in 1851, if you look to the left, the population of the whole population of Gunton is 77 people. 27 of those people are actually living in Warren House. That's a third of the population of the whole of Gunton in 1851 are living in Warren House. And last, I've just about come to the end now. I do apologise for one of the glitches we've had tonight. I'm going to iron this out this time round. We come to the next slide, the very last slide. We've gone from the top end of the admirals through the landed gentry. When the 1881 census was taken, I came across this entry for Gunton, and it says there's 2 families living in a van laying on Gunton Common. 2 families, Charles Gray and his extended family, William Harris and his extended family. And the enumerator who took the census there, where it says they're both called, the heads of both families are tinkers, and so they're living in tinkers' vans. And where born, again, I don't know if you can look closely at that screen. For the first family, the enumerator who took the census couldn't understand what these people were saying, and he actually put where born could not be made out. And again, the second family, a little bit more of that, somewhere Essex Horser he's written, for the head of the family. And one is born in Dis, so these people are moving about. And these are a family of tinkers, obviously moving round, who are basically squatting illegally on the common at Gunton. Possibly, I should think, or probably Irish tinkers that are travelling through Suffolk at the time. And their brogue, their accent is so strong that the enumerator can't understand what they're saying when they try to explain where they come from. So again, that's the last of my slides. All we do is we just move on to the next one, please, and say thank you for coming along this evening. As I said, this is where we started. This is Gunton today. And as I said, this is not the end by any means. This is simply part of a much bigger story. Well, thank you, everybody. And that's me done.
Ivan, I'm just going to come to a couple of comments actually. There's a few from people saying, can we move on? Can we move on the slide? Do you know what? I'm so sorry. I had been trying to from the back end of this. If it's any comfort, to anyone who's watching and thinking, actually, what Ivan is saying doesn't match what is on the screen. We use the same technology as the government do for their coronavirus briefings. And now and again, I'm slightly comforted to hear Boris say, next slide, because it does. Sometimes the technology doesn't always work. So I hadn't fallen asleep back here, I promise. I just couldn't progress it. But anyway, we have had a few other comments as well. Linda Boyce, I wonder what these people would think of Gunton now. Do you know what, Linda? I was thinking exactly that as Ivan was talking about some of the characters, and yeah, absolutely. And we've got a comment here from Steve Fingleton as well. Thanks, Ivan. Interesting as always. And then a few earlier on in the session, a couple of late joiners, people saying. Sorry to be late, guys, but here now. That was Chris Collins and Linda Boyce. Lovely to tune in again.
Yeah. Can I just go on about what I said right at the beginning? I've got a new setup for next week. I'm not going to use the current one that we're using. I've now got my big laptop, my big desktop computer fitted up with a mic and a camera, where I'll be able to see the slides that you're watching, and I won't have to look at the ones on my laptop. And that way, hopefully, we can really get what I'm saying perfectly synced with what's happening on the screen, rather than what is happening on your screen while I'm looking at my laptop. So hopefully, by next Monday, we'll have that, and I shall be sitting in my den, and you'll see me in a slightly different environment. But I think it's now essential that we do that, Stephen. We're
getting there, aren't we? But I think when we consider as well that we've never been in the same room since we started these, and when technology allows, it's all wonderful. But just occasionally, it's just slightly compromised. But I think we still absolutely understand what you're saying, and people are certainly appreciating it. Comment here from Linda Boyce. Brilliant. Never knew any of this. Thank you, Ivan. Chris Collins, thanks. I thought I knew a lot about Gunton, but I was wrong. And Jerry Poole, I love the thought of Green Score House. Definitely an enigma. I thought that too, actually, Jerry. Yeah. And then Jackie Draper, Ivan, she says, thank you, Ivan and Stephen. Well, thank you, Jackie, for tuning in. I'm just actually going to take a moment to just very quickly talk about what we're doing here as well. Oh, Ivan's gone, but he'll be back when I'm finished gabbling. If you've enjoyed tuning in any session really, or whether you've tuned into all 9 of these, or whether you've just been with us this evening, firstly, thank you very much. Secondly, could you click share? Because not only does it help us to, if you're enjoying it, hopefully to reach other people so that they too can enjoy it. Let me lift this up a bit. That's better. So that they too can enjoy it. But also it does help to spread the wonderful job that Ivan is doing, which celebrates the great heritage of Lowestoft and Waveney and Suffolk and East Anglia and surrounding areas to people further afield. And certainly we do have people tune in really from all over the place, well beyond East Anglia, whether they're ex-Lowestoft residents or just people interested in the local history to us. So please do click share, and please, if you're able to, tune in tomorrow as well, because every Tuesday evening at 7:30, Mondays 7:30 is with Ivan, Tuesdays 7:30 is Paul and myself, and we do our shanty live streams, which celebrates some of the music that we've been able to provenance has been used, created or sung in or off the coast of Lowestoft as part of the fishing community that existed there. So please do tune in tomorrow. If you haven't seen any of the others or all of the others, all the previous 8 are actually able to watch on Facebook, and some of them on YouTube. I think we started on about number 5 for Ivan, going live on YouTube and Facebook concurrently, or simulcasting as they call it. So you can watch some of the previous ones on YouTube and all of them on Facebook, and we've actually put them into a playlist series, so they're much easier to find now. And I guess really that's probably all I need to say, Ivan. I'm just gabbling really, but giving our Tuesday sessions a bit of a promotion. And I'm going to bring up a couple more A couple more comments. Diana Calver, thanks. So interesting. Good to find out some of the history of places I regularly walk. I think that's a really good point, actually, Ivan, because I went for a walk the other day, and I'm trying to think where it was now, but it was actually on one of the places you talked about, and it seemed like a different walk to me, even though I'd done it many times. And I think people do that, don't they? They walk along places, and when they have a bit of kind of historical information, it brings it more alive for them.
Yeah, well, hopefully, for instance, I know the Gunton Woods Walk is a very, very popular walk. Hopefully, some of the people who've been watching tonight often go there, and I'm sure many of them do. Hopefully, when the next time they walk through there, they'll kind of see its backstory, if you like. That had they walked through there, 180 years ago, they would have been walking through open fields and pastures, hardly a tree in sight. And now you go through to there today, and not only is it quite heavily wooded, but through the wood you can glimpse modern houses, modern housing estates, modern roads, but still nestled in one little corner. We've got the wonderful Norman Church of St. Peter, and I hope that does the trick. So come on to next Monday, on the subject. I realised really I haven't. Excuse me, it's getting warm in here. I realised I haven't really done anything about Lowestoft. So what I'm going to do for next time, I'm going to do a slideshow. I was just going to do a straightforward sort of an hour long of pictures of old Lowestoft, but what I'm going to do is I've got a presentation that I'll need to tweak a little bit, but we could do it. And I call it Changing Lowestoft, and having a look at how the town has changed, and perhaps looking at, to a certain extent, why it might have changed. So this will be Changing Lowestoft next time. I think that's what I'll do, rather than just a straight slideshow of old Lowestoft pictures. I do think most pictures need to have a bit of continuity to them, and also a bit of narrative behind them. So I'll do that next Monday, I think.
Brilliant. Well, so you heard it here first. Next Monday, the 27th of July, Changing Lowestoft. And Ivan, I've actually got a few more comments here, so I'm going to bring those up as well. Richard Goldspink says, thanks, Ivan. I have a vague recollection of seeing ruins in Gunton Woods in the 70s. Chris Collins says, so enjoyable and learning lots. A big thank you, Ivan. Susan Corkman says, me too. I used to play in the woods a lot. And Jerry Paul says, oh, I meant to ask Ivan, what is the big hole out the back of Gunton Woods? That's not the well that you referred to, is it, Ivan?
No, that's very good. Is that the one in the field, Jerry? Oh, you can't answer.
No. Well, he can. It just might take a wee while. That's fine.
No, if it's the great big wooded hole that you're talking about in the field to the east of the woods, if you remember, one of the things when they're talking about the farm, they're talking about the clay. They were saying that the soil there was being greatly improved because of the clay. Now the clay is known as marl. The soil is very light in Gunton, and in many places around here they would dig deep holes down to a heavier clay, and that would then be ploughed into the light soil and improve the soil. And I think that big hole is actually what was once they called a marl pit, where they would be digging out the clay to improve the land.
Brilliant. So in the meantime, Ivan, Jerry's replied saying, yes, that's the one. So you answered that for him completely off the cuff. Thank you. Well, do you know what? The other thing I'd like to do is, Ivan's very humble about this, but he is an author, and as authors do, they have books out there. And so I'm just going to bring up some of his publications that are available. There is one, A Trial of Witches. Another one, A Return to Haunted Lowestoft. and George Borrow, Alton and beyond. All of those available from, we're going to say, in order of preference, I think, Waterstones Lowestoft or Beckles Books. But if you want a copy and you can't get them anywhere else, Amazon is available. We just don't like to promote it first, do we?
No.
And I think, do you know what, Ivan? I think that's it. We've got just one more comment from Jerry saying, "Okay, that makes good sense. Thank you." I think, as we usually do, Ivan, I'll give you the last word. But for anybody who's watching, we're here again next Monday with episode 10. And as Ivan has just said, it will be on changing Lowestoft. So please do tune in. And if you haven't caught all of tonight, you can go back and watch anything that you've missed. It'll all be available to watch again. So thanks, Ivan, and just over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. It's nice to be here again doing this. As I said, again, apologies from both of us for the slight continuity glitches there, but I hope that next week, by moving from where I am at the moment into my den and setting up this on the big desktop computer with a much larger screen, I can look directly at the screen and see the same presentation that you're seeing and notice if there's any glitches crept in. So the environment will be slightly different. I'm sitting in my lounge, in the corner of my lounge at the moment. My den is a slightly different story, so that means into the next 7 days I'll probably have to tidy it up a little bit before it goes out to the public, but that's not my problem. That's not your problem, that's my problem. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I hope some of that was of some interest. I'm sure it was. As always, I enjoyed doing it. I thank Stephen for inviting me to come along and do these talks. They do help to relieve the monotony sometimes, because not only do I have this wonderful evening talking, sometimes I think I'm talking to myself because I can't see anybody out there apart from Stephen. It breaks up the monotony doing these once a week with the talks. And of course, that then means I can fill up a fair bit of time during the week prepping for the next talk as well. So yeah, I think they're all sort of therapeutic one way or the other. Anyway, thanks folks for tuning in. Thanks for everything. And thank you, Stephen. And back to you.